Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I am Hannah Braderud. Today, I am really excited to introduce a good friend and just awesome, inspiring person, Heather Younger. Welcome to Magic in the Room.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited we're finally able to do this.
Yes, me too. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. We've had a few ongoing conversations. We originally crossed paths at No Longer Virtual with Sarah Elkins a few years ago and have reconnected every year in that forum and just have kind of started having some conversations around, there's a lot of alignment of some of the things that we really care about at Purpose and Performance Group and what our listeners of Magic in the Room really care about as leaders of organizations. So Heather, you're a founder and CEO of Employee Fanatics. You're a two-time TEDx speaker, a consultant, and two-time best-selling author, The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, and your latest book, The Art of Caring Leadership, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. You also have another book in the works we're aware of, The Art of Active Listening. So definitely anticipating that. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that book when it is closer to being released. So welcome, Heather. Why don't you give us a little bit of just kind of a background? You're very accomplished. How did you arrive at this point in your career? Why are you here? Why do you do the work that you do today?
Well, thank you for the compliment, number one. I have to say that what I've learned is there's a couple of things. That consistency pays off, and that I don't limit myself by what other people can do, don't do, think I can do. And I focus forward and my eyes are forward all the time, irrespective of any barriers or anything that comes in my way. So that's the reason why I got to where I'm at. It's not because there's some level of like, oh, she's just so amazing or anything. It's just that I'm just super consistent and very resilient. So I would say those are kind of the two things to start off with. Why I do the work. The work I do is around helping organizations create cultures of listening. And when we're talking about listening, we're talking about listening to the voices of everybody at work and making sure that we use those voices to really propel the culture forward, make the experience better for those that are in and outside the organization, that are interacting with the organization. And so it's just helping to create safe spaces, helping to use the information that they hear in surveys and focus groups and roundtables and employee resource groups and all of that to say, what do we do about it? And we help them with that process. So I do that in my speaking, my writing, and all of those things. Caring leadership came up, well, because it's who I am. Really, to be honest. And while I'm not perfect at it, none of us are, I'd be in organizations and I would be so frustrated by all the leaders. I felt like I just would hit my head against the wall because they just didn't get it. They didn't get that I didn't feel cared for. They didn't get that I needed to feel heard, that other people around me didn't feel heard, that they were fearful, that they were mistrusting, and that there was no communication going on. And so I just said to myself, gosh, I need to really focus on this. And at some point, I don't know, I started this podcast and this has been maybe 2017 or 18, I can't remember when it was. And it's called Leadership with Heart. And as I started, I just did it because I was like, I need people to just hear. So it's like another way to evangelize this message of like, let's just lead with heart. Let's care more. I know it sounds squishy, but here's the reason why. I listen to leaders talking about it who've actually like lived through it and their business have done well from it. And then I get to maybe like episode 25 and I go, oh my gosh, these leaders are so brilliant. Like I have got to find a way to synthesize these things. And I started to see themes, of course. So I took it upon myself after, I think I included about 80 of those voices. Now I've interviewed, 200 and something, I can't remember, but I put about 80 of those in some way, shape or form in the book, The Art of Caring Leadership, how leading with heart uplifts teams and organizations is what the subtitle is. And so when I did that, I just like the brilliance was just exploded. So that book was so much more about other people than it was about me. The first book was Fully Me with just a little bit of research. The second book, it's like so much brilliance that just was synthesized into the 9 behaviors for caring leadership. I wanted it to be like less squishy. Hey, sometimes I know you guys know what I mean. It's like, I know people are like, oh, she's so hard. It's hard. It's just so like stuffed. And so there's all these things. And I'm like, those are the hardest things you can ever do. It's hard. It's so hard. So I want to tell you what are the things I can do that make people feel more cared for. And that's the reason why I came up with the 9 behaviors in the book for the art of caring leadership.
Yeah, we often say the soft stuff is the hard stuff, and I was thinking about that as we started, and then that's where you went, right? People like, oh, this squishy stuff, how do we do it? And, we get in a room with a client or a team for the first time. And they're like, oh, are you going to make us do trust falls? And, all of these things. And for a while I tried to say, oh, like we'll get to the practical stuff, we'll get to action items, we'll get to strategies. And that's true. But, when we were just able to admit that squishy, soft stuff is actually a technical skill in some ways. It is a skill that can be built, and it is very difficult. Emotional intelligence, right? Building that is a lifelong practice that takes passion, commitment, dedication, not unlike any other technical skill that someone would want to master. And so I just want to kind of pull some thread on that for you. When did you start to understand that you were interested in the squishy, soft stuff and in that art, in that pursuit as a central part of your life as a leader? Was it an aha moment? Was it, oh, I've always been this way? How did this become something that led you to kind of your mastery today?
It started with that adversity. So it's like the reason I was saying I'm like a consistent and resilient is it started early on, but being an only child, and you two know the story of like born to a white Jewish mother, Black Christian father. And my mom's family really we were black sheep. So my dad and I never were able to go to like large family gatherings. We were really on the outside. And so I, just kind of had to fight my way into some type of belonging, some type of connection. And there was one aunt that I had, this particular story, there was one aunt that I had. We moved from Ohio, which is where all the family was at, to Las Vegas when I was 9. And this one aunt of mine, I thought of her as my favorite aunt. She always had this way of making me feel special. And she would send this big box with 8 individually wrapped gifts for Hanukkah. So it'd be 8 individual. And I'd see that box. Of course, I was excited about the box. It was gifts. I was a young kid, but I would just see it, and it made me feel that connection. So she didn't know, but she kind of created that sense of belonging and connection in a place where I was really excluded from my own family. And so I remembered what that made me feel like. And then over my life, like every time here's an example. I remember being in law school. This is before I even started managing people. I was in law school, and I remember this one gentleman. He was more of an introvert. He was a reader. He would always be like on the floor. I remember him sitting on the floor reading books all the time before class. I'm like, how are you going to read more books? We always read books. But he was always by himself. So whenever we would do something, I'd be like, hey. And so he and I developed a good relationship. So I'm always like, hey, you come over here. Like, I want you to be here with us. You come with me. And it's kind of my style now where it's like, let's all be together. Let's all circle around the thing. I want to hear you. You're just as important as everybody else. So that whole not feeling included, not feeling like I had a voice, not feeling like I had a belong, created this like drive in me to make sure that others do feel that way. So that's just how I walk. I just do that. I'm like, oh, that person's by themselves. Why are they by themselves? Like, why are they there? And it's just, come on. And you're important. And your voice, I don't care what your title is. Your voice is just as important as the next person. I could care less if that person has a CEO voice. Like, it doesn't matter to me what they are, because they need to treat the other person, whether it's a plumber or whatever it is, just as equally. But it comes from me being excluded as a kid.
Isn't that amazing? How sometimes adversity, or maybe always, I don't know, adversity is the best teacher. The obstacle is the way. I'm a big fan of that book and the whole concept of, we don't achieve greatness or whatever our vision of success is by things being easy. We achieve it not despite of our challenges and hardships and adversity, but because of the adversity. I'm a big believer in that. So,
yep.
Thank you for sharing that experience. There's definitely an element too of when you've experienced being an outsider and being on the outside, you become an observer because you're a little bit on the outside of what's going on. So you're watching and you're observing and you're learning and you're taking things in. I definitely have a lot of shared experiences like that of never quite feeling like I fit in when I was growing up, right? And just learning by watching and observing, and then keeping that observant mind, right? And the curiosity of trying to understand how things really work, because it wasn't intuitive to be, early on for me.
Yes. Yeah, well, even just you now, I mean, goodness, you're like a beautiful, long, lanky blonde. I mean, I can see people going like, you're not like me anyway. Like, you're not like me because I can see that happening. And and there's so many, what I always tell people in the audience as I talk to, it's like, okay, go back in your head and think of a time when you felt excluded. Like, it was on the baseball team, it was theater, it doesn't really matter. And who has not ever been excluded? It's like everybody's hands are like, nobody's hands are up, because we've all been in that place for some way, shape, or form. And mine happened to be a little bit more extreme with lots of like drama injected, let's say, that I didn't necessarily have to go over today. But not everybody has that, but they have some form that they can relate to. And so I always tell people, like, I want you to hold on to that as we talk about, for example, diversity and belonging. I want you to hold on to that feeling of when you were excluded, because that's what's happening every day to a subset of people. And if you can hold on to the feeling, then when you're in their midst, you can hopefully pick up on what they would be feeling, and so as you talked about, Luke, the soft, hard thing, I often find that even the person with the hardest outer core, when I start to go, but the way you responded to like this thing in this emotional way, when you consider yourself logical or not emotional, or this thing, like I saw the way this person recognized you and how you kind of your shoulders popped up and you had like more confidence. You may be, like saying Marvel hero, right? But in the end, your heart bleeds and needs that kind of, there's affirmations like what we talked about, right? Connection and all of that. So it's just trying to bring them to the point where they can see back in their history when it happened. And then at the same time, remind them of how they feel when someone does it for them. So when they express care in the way of affirmation or recognition, when someone does that to them and what they feel like, and then it reminds them, and then they go, oh, I can see why I need to do more of that for my people, because it's a gift, right?
Absolutely. It is a gift. And Stephen Covey even talks about that, right? How everybody has this soft core, soft center. We're all really sensitive on the inside, whether we like to admit it or not, right?
Absolutely.
And if we can just even keep that in mind when we meet with leaders, when we meet with people that have a certain status or position, often we assume things that they don't care, or that they have, like they don't care about the soft stuff. Well, everyone does, because everybody has someone they love, everybody has someone that they care about, and everybody wants to feel loved and like they belong. And for me, regardless of when I meet people from all walks of life, regardless of status level in the organization, when I keep that first in mind, I can relate and connect on a very authentic, deeply human level, and a lot of barriers to communication and trust fall away.
So true. It's so true. All about intentionality. How do we set out to interact with someone?
Yeah. So you mentioned doing diversity and belonging work, and that's something I was curious to ask you about. And just hearing this story about people connecting with that soft core, noticing others, making conscious choice. I'm curious, and hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot asking this question, but I'm going to make an assumption that you've probably been called in at some point as part of a risk mitigation strategy, primarily, right? Leaders saying, we have stakeholders that are going to give us a hard time. Hey, the landscape's changing. and on Wall Street, and for me to get the financing terms that I need for my enterprise, we need to have some sort of diversity, inclusion, belonging thing. Someone come help us with that. But knowing you and knowing your level of skill, I'm imagining you in a room moving it from a risk mitigation activity to something that is tied to the values of the organization and the values of the leaders and them taking ownership. So I'd love just like, what's a story around that? And what was the thing that you were able to do to move people from transacting around diversity, belonging to actually transforming their culture and organization?
That's a really good question. Well, I can think of a story that you are right that people will call me in for that. Like they just want to do some training. It's with training. And while we do training, it's not strategic enough. It doesn't connect with values and objectives. It doesn't connect with the vision and the mission. It doesn't connect with any of that stuff. So for me, I'm really not interested. Now, early on, did I take that kind of stuff? I did. I took it because it was, you're building a business. But what I started to realize, number one, you talk about transformation. I'm really interested in transformation, cultural transformation. I'm interested in long-term. So no one and done types of relationships at all. I'm very, very clear with anybody who wants to do business with employee fanatics that that's what we do. It's all about, we're going to be there with you thick and thin the next probably 3 years doing this work. And then you're going to see the end result and that's paid off. But I had one client that just, again, private equity wanted to definitely have just the training to check the box. And I was like, that's just not what you do. You don't start there. I need to evaluate these other things. And so for us, our entire foundation is on listening. So we don't do anything. You don't even go collect $300 until you have done the listening process first. And then from there, maybe or maybe not, training in that particular topic might be required. Training is usually required, but it's not always in the obvious diversity and belonging categories, is what I mean. So in that case, that's kind of what happened is they're really, it was a predominantly female organization. They didn't have a lot of complaints in their survey, or there was nothing really there that kind of showed me that we need to be talking about unconscious bias or thing. There was a little bit of it from their customer side. We had all kinds of angles we needed to address, right? But in the end, it was like walking them backward and saying, okay, we need to look at the survey if you've already done one. If not, we need to do one. We need to look at that, see what the action items are. And then we need to create kind of a culture team that's not just made up of all these executive leaders. We need to make sure it's people who are in the front lines of all these different businesses. And so we just did, like I said, a lot of that kind of work. And they started, it was a success story to the extent that they got the point that they couldn't start just at training. I'm not sure the sustainability of that particular one. And what I've learned is, if the leadership team is not like wholly bought into the concept of transformation or wholly bought into the concept that this is a long haul and not a one and done and not just a check the box, it's probably not going to be good. And then I had another client that was kind of on the opposite, where they followed everything. They did like 90% of the recommendations they've done over like over 4 years of just continuing to work with us. And their culture is highly engaged. Their frontline is highly engaged. They have groups that work together that really own what it means to be a listening organization, but owns everything related to DEI. They just have done an amazing job. I really wish every client was like them. It's kind of like if I wanted to say, here's my archetype of my perfect client, it is them. And they did see changes, and they were already like a top workplace, but they wanted to continue to work their way up, and they have. So. Yeah. Yeah,
that's interesting. I know every consultant has their favorite client, right? The people that you're like,
listen.
Why am I even here? You're like, wait, you're way smarter than me. Just keep going. I'm just going to applaud you. Exactly. But something that I've seen is that a big difference is like ownership, like owning what do we value and what do we want our culture to be? And I, as a leader, I'm responsible for that. I'm accountable for that. And I think whenever we see people asking, and, diversity, inclusion, belonging stuff, like that's the easy example. We see it in other areas, whether that's employee engagement or whether that's even job design, pieces like that. But it's really, am I going to be okay as a leader outsourcing at its core, a moral decision? Like, Heather, I need you to come and tell me what is the moral decision for my company. And I think that's where, when we see people that's not, I'm outsourcing my morality to you, so help me figure out what my environmental policy should be. Instead saying, I have a vision for what our approach to our environmental impact is, or I have a vision for what our culture should look like and how people should feel like they belong here. I need your help knowing technically how to implement that vision. Like, that's a much different story.
Totally different story. I like it when, I like when people know that they want to get somewhere. It's okay. Yeah. Like you said, if they don't know how to get there. I remember that one client that's my favorite client now, but like 4 years ago, I love them. They were great, but they didn't really have a clue as it related to the need to really act upon the voices of their people. They just didn't understand that part. And so once I kind of clarified it and they were like, what? It was just so obvious to them that, wait a second, we're missing a huge opportunity here. And then they became, again, just kind of accustomed to the process and running it every year and doing the things. And so it was just, and with them, I think we're already doing so many good things. And that's the other thing. It's like, if you're already doing good things and you don't suck, because you don't suck now, and your goal is just to get better. And so you're an organization that's focused on continuous improvement, then those are the kind of people I want to work with. I'm not really looking at, those who really just suck. If they suck and there's like a new leadership team and those people don't suck. And I know you know what I mean by that. I'm just going to say that, but they their minds are like forward thinking, like they look inward. They know they're not blaming. They're ready to take action. They're ready to put resources behind it. The organization may be in a bad shape beforehand, but if the team here, because it has to kind of start there, right? No matter what, if they're in place and their minds are right and they're prepared, I'm okay to do that too, because that's just more transformation and that's fine. But I also love the ones that kind of have done a lot of great stuff. And you're like, now I want to just like 1-2 jab it. I'm like, yeah, let's go do that.
Yeah. Awesome. So Heather, what does it mean so we've been talking a little bit about caring leadership. Like, why does it matter? How is caring leadership different from any other form of leadership? Just tell us a little bit about what's your definition of a caring leader? Yes.
Yeah. So caring leadership is showing concern and kindness towards those who look to you for guidance or leadership. And it's doing it in very consistent ways instead of just like the onesie twosie, really be very intentional about it. But it's not like a random act of kindness. It's a level of intentionality, and it's setting out to say, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to do these 9 things, and 9 different behaviors that I outline in the book. And when I do those things, I do those things consistently and from the heart, like from a place of goodness, from a place of non-manipulation. Then that's what makes me a caring leader. But to be honest, I call everybody, including myself, a caring leader in development, because we just never really arrive, do we? We make little mistakes here and there, but that's part of the caring. The caring leader is like, we take care of us. We care for ourselves. We make sure we surround ourselves with people. We get ourselves coached. We just take that time to really round out our skill set. We recognize when we aren't in the best place. We might, get a support system that helps with that. And then we start, really working on how do we meet the whole person where they're at? Even if we're not comfortable with it? Because, in this very politically divided world right now, the need to meet people wholly, but stepping outside of ourselves and our own personal filter, our own personal, whatever that is, and saying, what do they need from me right now? Even if I don't agree with whatever's happening, how do I meet them right there? And so the whole personal leadership is really about that. It's like deep leaning in, deep listening, and removing of like judgment and a level of acceptance. Again, acceptance. This is a tricky part in this current world. Acceptance doesn't necessarily mean agreement. It doesn't. People think that has to be the same way. It doesn't. It means that here's what I accept. I accept that you are choosing to walk in your life, whatever the way you're walking your life. You're choosing that. And that's giving different ramifications, ups and downs, whatever. And I'm here for you. Despite my agreement or not of whatever that is, I'm here for you in the moment. Now, it does take a special people to be able to lean in that way, to be accepting of a person, even if it can be a divisive topic, even if it's not the same. I'm still here for you. And you know what? We're going to disagree on this, but we're not going to talk about this particular thing. What I want to talk about is, how are you feeling? Yeah. What's going on with you? Right. It's a different way of showing up. That's just one element of it.
It strikes me the way you describe that. It's a more mindful way of showing up, right? If we think about mindfulness as really experiencing and accepting what is without putting a value judgment on it, right? And recognizing that circumstances are neutral. It's our own thoughts about things that make them quote unquote interesting that, we're the ones who put the value judgment on, right? So if we can look at someone, another human being, and their experience and accept it for what it is, this is their experience.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad. Like when we experience things as good or bad, it's internally in us that's created, right? Yep. And it's based on our own experiences, our own biases. And, we could go down a whole rabbit hole on implicit bias and how affects how we show up with others. But it's easier said than done, right? Because lived experience informs our values and what we care about. And it's easy to, like our brains actually are wired that way to categorize something as good or bad. Is this a threat or something that's going to help me? Is it a reward to the brain? Is it a threat to the brain? We've talked about psychological safety as also a prerequisite to belonging and feeling safe. But we, as leaders, I believe we have a moral imperative to look at the people that are in our charge as whole and valuable and accept them for who they are, whether we agree with, their beliefs or not. Right. And that's what's so crazy about today's world, because it seems like a lot of people who claim to be very inclusive are very inclusive of people who believe what they believe.
Yes. And inclusive to me, I always extend outside of the protected groups. So for me, inclusive is everybody. It's Ben, it's Luke, it's everybody, because we've all had such different experiences. And so just because someone's a white guy doesn't mean they don't have a unique experience and that I should put them on the outside. They should be around the circle too, for many different reasons, but most of all, because they're human too. And their voices are equally as important as the next person. And so what really pisses me off is when I'm around a table and someone maybe they look like me, or they're from a different background and they want to be the loudest voice. And I'm like, wait a second, Lou's voice is just as important as yours. That can't happen. So for me, that's when I get like, I'm all squishy until you start to make somebody seem better than the other. Yeah. That comes from my background though. So my ability to kind of see both sides, to like hold things even and equal, to defend kind of unjust things, it all comes from that adversity from early on, where I was like, wait a second, like I didn't have a voice, but you didn't treat me this way. But at the same time, I'm able to see the complication that existed, for example, with my grandparents. And they were Orthodox Jews, and they had like all these pressures in their community. And I was able to see like the pressures, all of the complexities, while at the same time suffering a lot in silence, right? So now in this world, when I'm faced with these things that are counter to all the things that maybe I stand for, in the end, I have to go, okay, for me, divisiveness is the thing that kills us all. So if I can do anything in this world, if I like leave a stamp, it's going to be to unify under the whole idea of basic human dignity. And what do I deserve from you as a human? So,
yeah. So I'm going to dig even deeper in that. The thought that came to my mind as you were describing carrying leadership as someone who might not necessarily agree, right, but accepts and supports, says, I'm here for you, here for your development, here for your belonging, was pastoral. Like that feels to me like a pastoral approach to leadership. And that might be a loaded word for a lot of people. But what I mean is someone who cares more for the outcomes for the other person, has a vision of the path for that person, and has some sort of moral authority in guiding people forward. And I guess my question there is, when we look at the social fabric of the United States, like there are some major threads of that fabric that are pretty frayed. We know that religious organizations are on a decline in a lot of ways. We know that local communities The town square is not really a town square anymore. Most people are inside on their screens. And I'm curious, what do you think is the role of a caring organization in, I don't want to say replacing, right? Don't hear me say that an organization should replace a religious institution or a local governing body or whatever it is. But what's the role of caring leaders and caring organizations in where we are in history right now, and as we look forward the next 10, 20, 50 years?
It's so funny that you use the word pastoral because of that whole background and conversion from where I was to where I'm at. And oh my gosh, the level of complexity, I can't tell you, from Judaism, Catholicism, and being a person who presents the way I do in a colorful female way. And people just make lots of assumptions behind that. I remember when I sent the reviewers the book, the Art of Caring Leadership book, and one of the women was not comfortable with my language. And that is because I'll say things like lead people to the light, or I'll just say things like that. It feels very, like you said, pastoral when I do it. And it is because I do feel called to this work. I'm not saying I feel like I'm some priest or I don't know, the Pope or anything like that. But in my mind, I was put here to do exactly what I'm doing. And the messages that I deliver are exactly in my heart. I'm delivering when I'm supposed to. And when I go on stage, for me, faith is a foundation. So I do say, your words, not mine, your words, not mine, your spirit, not mine. So I do that. So if it feels that way, that's good for me, because that's what I stand for. As we think about organizations, I mean, obviously the faith discussion and all of those things, I don't really think when we go there, we create more divisions. And so what I always like to say with them is if they can again center on kind of basic human tenets, like we talk about again, of community, belonging, listening, connection, all of the kind of the Maslow kind of look of things, right? Those foundational things. Now we know that faith creates community. We know those things to be true, but we don't have to go specifically there. And I've been successful in doing that when I talk in groups or talk to people that I could or could not. You have no clue where I stand on my views. I don't need to go there because then that divides. I don't want to divide. So if organizations could be thinking themselves as a unifying force, I think in the world, we'll be much better off. Now, this is hard to do. Because as I think about even the listening that we do, the surveys and reading comments, the DEI surveys and the listening sessions, and there are some comments inside those the DEI surveys where it's there's a faction inside of every corporation of people who it's going to be 30%, but it's around about 30%, where they're not interested in talking about all this diversity stuff. They're not interested. They feel like a lot of the things knock up against their faith. They feel like the organization may be in conflict with their faith beliefs. There's all kinds of things that are coming in there, and we cannot hush those voices. We can't hush those. The problem is we want to hush them for the sake of the majority voice. That's kind of the end thing to be right now. We got to hear them all. Doesn't mean we have to agree with them all. See, this is the thing. The acceptance of the reality isn't the agreement of what's happening. And I think that's the key, is that we can kind of get to the point where if organizations can open up the forums and put on the table that everybody can talk, it needs to be safe, and the safe spaces don't just happen because you announce it. They happen because of a whole bunch of things we set up to make sure. Psychological safety is a big part of that. Trust and all these things are a big part of that. But in the end, they have to know that. I think the key with these organizations is they just want to go in and be I profess a safe space today. So now let's talk about race relations. And now let's talk about LGBTQ, whatever. And it's just okay, you can talk about it all you want. Whether I talk to you and tell you the truth are a whole nother situation. So what are you going to do, organization, to set up a place that is safe, that has trust as a foundation? What are you going to do? What are you going to do that backs up what you say you're going to do, and prove it to me that you did it, and do it because I'm involved in the process. You had me bought in. You heard me. You listened to me. Hence why I'm doing the next book, because no one does that. We just don't do that well.
And yeah, and what you've touched on is kind of what I see as the crux of this whole conversation, hearing all the voices and allowing everyone to be heard without passing judgment is easy in concept. It's simple, but it's hard, right? Often the simplest things are the hardest things. Because when we have people who speak up, who have a a view that might be very opposite from our own, it can feel very polarizing.
Yeah.
And to your point, like the end thing is to be inclusive of the majority view. and that means some views that may have been in the majority in the past are now in the minority, and it's easy to shut them down. And, so how do we do that in a caring and loving way that also protects the values of the organization that we've, the values that we all agree to? If we're going to be in community in this organization, these are the things that we believe, being explicit about that, and then allowing people to have a voice that may differ from the stated views. It's a balance.
It's a very tricky one. I think no matter what it is, like when we're leaning into these like safe spaces, when we're in those places where we're having those conversations, if we're going into a conversation to like, it's like not just to be seeked understood, but it's kind of like this, I want you to accept me. So I'm going into the conversation with you to accept me and my side, and maybe even to agree with my side. I'm going in as like from a different place than I give of myself. Like I'm blank slate. I'm blank slate right now. And let me know, like, I just want to hear why, like, why do you feel that way? I just want to hear blank slate and just listening. And then asking curious questions that continue to let them know I'm super curious, that I'm interested, and that I'm blank slate. So I continue to validate for them or verify for them that I'm blank slate, because the more I go in that loaded place, which is where most of us are at, you go on social media, you see it everywhere. And I'm just like, I want to boil to the top. It's not always because I'm disagreeing with the person. I'm just so irritated that they're shutting everybody else down. I told you that's a trigger for me. Don't you shut somebody down in front of me. And so I will be like, okay, no, I heard that. Let's get to the why you feel that way. But I also want to hear from Kelly, because Kelly's voice is different, but I want to hear it. And I think when we have an organization that really does that, it's like, nope, let's hear him. Let's hear him. Now I have my own biases, Hannah, right? My story makes me a biased person. Mm-hmm. My bias is I want unity. I don't want division. So when I go into something, I'm not going to lean into conflict. I want conflict to come out because I want to talk about it. But my whole goal is to unify, not divide. Everybody has different biases, right?
Yeah. And we all do, right?
We do. We all do.
And most of them are unconscious. Like
we're absolutely
not aware of them. And I think that's the key here, right? Is building awareness, because you can't be curious about something you have no awareness of. And so to even lead with curiosity, we have to have some level of awareness that there's something here, there's something to be curious about, right? Because a lot of things just go straight over our heads.
So true.
If we haven't had the exposure or received the feedback or observed the thing, right? Like we get blind to a lot of things if they're not, where our focus and attention goes, that's where our energy flows, right? And that we see what we're looking for.
So true.
And we're so blind to the other things that we're not intentionally looking for, right? And so to just broaden our awareness, I think it is a first step. And that means, let's invite people to have the conversations.
And be fully present in the conversations too. Because we can be present like physically and not actually be there. And believe me, I'm guilty of that many times, mostly with my kids. And they call me on it. So, hey.
Yeah. And I just want to do some meaning making here for people who are listening, because this conversation, maybe the last 5-10 minutes, I think what helps me understand, well, why do I have to listen so hard? Why do I have to do this work? I would answer back with a question like, are we playing offense or are we playing defense? I think often we're in this defensive mindset where things like diversity, belonging conversations, things like what's the culture, the atmosphere of the team that I lead, we are in a compliance mindset where what do I have to do to keep things status quo, to keep my revenue coming in, to keep my turnover as low as it needs to be, versus when we're in an offensive mindset, what am I creating? What am I building? Versus what am I protecting? What am I afraid of? And I think the key to unlocking this is getting really clear on what am I building? And that is true at the organizational level. Why do we exist? What's the highest good we can offer to the world? Why are we asking everyone to get up and do this work with us together? Right? There needs to be a very solid answer to that. And when we have a really authentic, meaningful answer to what is our purpose here together, it becomes much easier to say, okay, if we're going to do that, there's an offensive component to our game that needs to be just as strong as the defensive component to our game. And that's true for an individual leader. Why am I doing this thing called leadership? What are the stories that I want people to be telling about me? What's the experience that I want people to have as they come into my presence, as they move on to my team, as they move off of my team, as they interact with my team? There should be an answer to that. What is the thing? What is my purpose? What's the vision that I'm moving towards? And when we have clarity, like clarity to the level that it's written down on a piece of paper somewhere, and you know what the exact words are, well then, okay, offensively, what has to happen for that to be true, for me to live into that vision? And when I go into how do I be a caring leader? How do I actually listen to my people? With that in mind, what's the thing I'm building? What's the legacy I'm building? What's the purpose I'm fulfilling? It's much different than I'm coming into this activity because I'm defending something, because I'm mitigating risk, because I'm accountable for X dollars of revenue, whatever it is, because someone made a complaint, right? It's a different story. And if you find yourself there in that defensive place, like, you have work to do to be able to actually move into that proactive, intentional leadership space. So I don't know. I just felt like there's a lot of that being said in our conversation, but I just want to spell it out, like, get yourself in that mindset. I don't know. I did a little bit of a, since we're using religious metaphors, a little soapbox on the corner there. So Heather, Hannah, like, spark anything for you? Like, anything you would change?
No, I think as I think about this idea of caring leadership, you have to go into it with, so there's intentionality, it's full of heart. So it's really a desire to serve. It does have a servant's heart. So that is there. This idea of leaving a legacy of care has to be kind of at the forefront. And so it says that doesn't mean it's a legacy of perfection. It doesn't mean we're perfect. It just means that the journey's worth it. It's centered mostly on others. Obviously we have to take care of ourselves along the way so we can fill them up too. But this, I think it's just, it really is, it starts from that servant's heart. When I say leadership with heart, caring leadership, it is emptying yourself out, your needs in that exact moment for you, for them. So you replace that and you kind of put the nail on the head on that one with Luke, that it is about that. There's this level of selflessness that kind of goes into it. Although, having said that, the first behavior is self-leadership, demonstrating and cultivating self-leadership. So we have to make sure we have that too. So knowing that, people say, well, I've been super compassionate, very empathetic during the pandemic, and I'm a very exhausted. And like, what about me? And I'm going to say, well, you got to start with you first. You have to take care of you first. There's like 9 different sub behaviors under self leadership that it really is like, these are the things you want to be outlining. You want to do these for yourselves as much as you can consistently, because you can't give from an empty cup, and otherwise that cup dries out and there's nothing else to give, and you're giving from your dryness, and that's not good. So when they come to you, your people come to you in the office and they drop something in your lap that's kind of heavy. And yes, it's hard to take and you're exhausted and all those things. Just know that they're entrusting you with their hearts. And what do you do with what they've entrusted you with? That's just a big question you have to think about. And leadership is not for the faint of heart, and is not for everyone. So if you're not somebody in a management role right now and you're going like, this sounds like a whole heck of a lot of work, and I am not sure this is for me, I would not go lightly there.
Yeah.
I would not go lightly there.
But you're so right, though. It starts with leading ourselves. Right. And understanding that for me to show up the way I need to show up as a caring leader, I have to care for me and lead me. Right. And that's something we talk a lot about too. And and work with organizations on, leadership essentials is about leading yourself, right? We lead ourselves, we lead teams, we lead leaders, and we lead organizations. Those are kind of, if you want to ladder the leadership journey, that's a way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
Of just getting proficient at leading ourselves, knowing what we need to be the best leader that we can be, to show up as the best version of ourselves. So I think this is a really good segue, Heather. We'd love to kind of get practical here, give some, some tips for how to apply and how to create a more caring leadership culture. And you've already alluded to the behaviors in your book, and you mentioned one of them, the first one being self-leadership. Would you care to kind of share with us what are the 9 behaviors, and what are some specific concrete tips that leaders can do to create a more caring organization?
I would say the 3 that kind of go together the best and really are just like deliver the 1-2 kind of uppercut thing is leading the whole person, safe space creation, and listening. And that is because you endear people to you if they feel that they can trust you, if they feel safe around you, if they feel you care about them as humans, not just what they do for you. So if you can make sure that if there's like one practical thing I'd say that I know people think either they don't do it or they're like, oh, I'll do it every once in a while, it would be making sure that you have weekly one-on-ones in your direct reports. Like make sure that you're having the one-on-ones. And when you have the one-on-ones, don't just start off on projects and processes. Actually, maybe parse out and let them know, like you can have an agenda ahead of time. They know the first 15 minutes, last 15 minutes, whatever, is a time to really have that heart discussion. Just try to find out what barriers are there, what's going on with their life, what can you do? Just listening, not with the intent of like, oh, I'm going to find out more about them so they can do more in their projects for me. So it's not about that. So I would say inserting a little bit more heart into the weekly conversations, being intentional about those conversations. If you have to cancel, because I know this happens, I've been a manager for a long time. If you have to cancel it, just try to like schedule it again later for that week. I am not telling, I had this just this is a story that points to the importance. And I think this is probably the most important thing we can do is give people undivided attention with the laptop lid down, the cell phone lid type, and just listening, just being present. When we do that, that whole person leadership comes in, safe space creation is created because trust is created, right? And I know we're going to go to bat for them. So all these things happen. I was in an interview with somebody, this has probably been, 10 years ago. I was interviewing with someone and a team member was in the room with me. And the person who was the prospect said, well, why should I come and work for your team? I have like another offer here. Why should I do that? And my team member, who I didn't know what he was going to say, he just like paused for felt like it was a minute or 2, but it wasn't. And he said, this woman right here. And I was like, well, what? I was like, looking behind like, what? And he said, here's why. And I did not even understand the power of that one thing I'm telling you to do until he said that. He said, listen, for 6 months before she started, no one came to visit us. I would rarely see a senior manager, and my manager, I don't even know where he was at. She came, she put us on the calendar, even though we were like clerks and like customer service people, like people with not big titles. She made us feel important. She held them, and when she couldn't, she'd reschedule. She'd always ask us what she could do to remove the barriers. And so he was like listing all these things, and it was in real life, and I was afraid. I didn't know what he was going to say. He could be like, I don't know why you should come, or he could say him anything, but he said that thing. And this is not to paint me as some like wonderful wizard. It was just like that one thing of like putting him on the calendar, showing up, like just making that level of importance was so, and that's one of them too, is making people feel important. So there's so many, all of these things intertwined to say, it's not rocket science. Doesn't cost a thing in most cases. It just costs your time, your attention, your care, but it's just like those little things. The one-on-one that's consistently held with laptop down, cell phone away, and just like leaning into the person. If you could just remember that one thing, instead of me listing 5,000 things, that one thing will be like huge dividends for your leadership.
Yeah, and I just want to pile on there too, because I know a couple things people are going to say. Like one is that I tried that. And I just want to say, like, if you don't do it for a month or two and you don't train your team what the intent is and that they bring items that they're concerned about and that you can have real conversation, it doesn't work because it's a new experience for most team members. And so you do have to consistently show up to build the trust and build the rhythm for you to start getting those dividends. So if you tried it for 2 weeks and then everyone was like, oh, this is pointless, we don't need to meet this often, like well, yeah, of course, like you never got to the returns. And then the other thing is like, just everyone saying, well, I don't have time, like, or just feeling that kind of squirminess inside, like, what do I even do with that time? And I just say, like, if you want to be a leader that has some sort of moral authority for your team and within your organization, like, you need to do the work internally to figure out, why is there that squirmy feeling? What do you believe that's causing you to think that maybe this isn't valuable? And then just like do the hard work, do the practice. It is hard. It's a muscle that has to be torn and rebuild multiple times to build the strength.
And by the way, if you do put the one-on-ones on the calendar, show up, just show up and actually do, be there when they show up because you asked them and invited them. We all have learned a lot about what not to do from leaders we've worked for, right? And I have this example of I was pretty new in an organization in a new industry, and my manager was required to have one-on-ones, so he put them on my calendar, and I came to his office at the scheduled time, and he wasn't there. So I waited around, he didn't show up. I went back to my desk, messaged him and said, hey, are we still meeting? Just let me know, I'm ready when you are. And yeah, and he was like, oh yeah, sorry, I had this thing come up. Let's just reschedule or maybe just meet next week. Next week, I go to his office, I show up, and he's not there. This became a pattern. So I very quickly learned that we don't actually do one-on-ones. So I just stopped going. I just stopped showing up, right? Because he trained me to expect that this was not a priority and it was not important. Now, for me, it still felt important, but it clearly wasn't important enough to him to even communicate that it wasn't important, right? And so it became a check the box thing. He did his thing, which he was asked, probably asked by HR to make sure he put, had one-on-ones, but they didn't actually happen. So
yeah, that sucks. I hate that so much. That just drives me, because what it says to you is you're kind of inconsequential. You're not really like all that important. These other people with bigger titles that like make more, whatever it is, are like more important than you. And that kind of gets to in my crawl too. It's kind of, you're right, because shutting someone's voice out and like also just completely ignoring them, period, is not a very kind and concerning thing to do. So they're not a caring leader in my book.
Caring. No, exactly. So Heather, it's been wonderful talking with you. And I know we could just go on talking for hours because, there's so many things to talk about. But we do want to come to a close for this conversation. We'll definitely have you back to continue the conversation, dive into some other topics. Before we close, I'd love to hear, what are kind of some key takeaways? Maybe Luke, what did you hear? What are some things that are going to stick with you from this conversation?
Yeah, we didn't say this explicitly, but I love the story, Heather, with you sharing about you having to span those boundaries between people who are on the outskirts and the community, right? And really doing work of creating belonging and building community with everyone as just a primary driver for you. And I thought we could probably just boil leadership down to that, right? If you're willing to do the work of seeing people that aren't connected, connecting them, and building something that is worth different people with different beliefs and different life experiences coming together for, like, I think that would be, you could almost define leadership around that, bringing different people together around a common vision. And so I just loved kind of your passion and you sharing a little bit of your story, and just amazing conversation. Look forward to the next time.
Yeah. All right, Heather, any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave our listeners with before we close?
I would just say, don't make this a journey of perfection. Just one little bit better every day, and keeping the eyes forward, as I talked about earlier. Just eyes forward, eyes forward, eyes forward, and eyes forward are, how can I serve others? How can I go into interactions serving instead of trying to see what I can get out of them? So that's what I would say.
If people want to connect with you, Heather, want to learn more about your work and buy your books, learn how you help, different ways of how you help organizations, how can they contact you?
Well, they can definitely not contact me through my kids who are in the other room. Being loud. I am so sorry. So hopefully you don't hear them chattering. It's so crazy. If you could just go to Heather Younger on LinkedIn, that's probably the best way to like kind of connect, or you can find me at employeefanatics.com, and that's FANATIX. And I'm pretty sure that'll be in the show notes, hopefully too. But those will be the two ways, I think. And when you go there, you'll find all the things. So the books and all those things will just kind of be around that area. But definitely join this just journey of just care and listening and community with me.
Awesome. And Luke, how can folks connect with us at Purpose and Performance Group?
Yeah, purposeandperformancegroup.com. LinkedIn is great too. Other social channels. If you are walking through how to build a culture where everyone can belong, if you don't have clarity on what's the offensive thing that you're building that you need to work towards instead of just defending all the time, that's what we do best, is clarify authentic purpose for organizations and then figure out what do we need to do to make those really real and clear, to build a community of people doing meaningful work around. So yeah, reach out. We'd love to talk to you. And, Heather, I also want to ask, since people are listening to this on podcast format, they're probably podcast listeners, what would they type in to their Apple Podcasts app to find you next?
Leadership with Heart. And voila, my face will pop up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the conversation. Appreciate the connection and community. And until the next conversation, have a great day.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.